Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Oh, water.
How's everybody doing? Are you guys not tired? Because I'm tired. Okay. Yeah, coffee, exactly. We're just going to get started right away. I'm fine.
We're good. We're good.
No, we're doing great. We're doing ecstatic. So I'm just going to start right away. Welcome, everybody, to the Character Armor Archetypes panel. We'll be talking about a lot of stuff today, and especially gameplay. We've been doing a lot of things, I think, for the past couple years. We've talked a lot about, oh, this is how the armor's made, and here's some pretty wear maps. And we'll be doing a little bit of that, as always, but we have a special guest with us today, and I think you guys will get a kick out of it. So just to go over the speakers today, it's myself, Jeremiah Lee. I'm the lead concept artist at the LA studio, Cloud Imperium Games, and to my I love you too. We also have Richard Tyrer. He's our lead FPS systems designer. Some of you guys have already seen him in the Theaters of War. And also for Cheyne Hessler, he's our senior character artist. And also Gaige Hallman, our lead character technical artist here with me today. And so if you guys haven't read the brochure or online, today's conversation is going to be an in-depth conversation of how armor will be categorized and set up for Star Citizen. Topics will cover how gameplay mechanics would play a role for certain armor types, and also we'll discuss about how armor are executed from design all the way into in-game implementation, which you guys care about. So, first of all, this is kind of a brief run-through of what topics we're going to cover today. Current state of FPS weapons, current state of FPS armor, where we like to go in the future with it, classes, playstyle, climate control, and temperature. And then we move on from design to character art, which is the concept, building armor from the concept and the challenges that we have to face building these things. And also, last but not least, one of the most important parts, which is the tech art, right? So we need the tech to make these beautiful things move. And so Gaige will be talking a lot about the research and development, and last but not least, the in-game implementation. So we're going to start this off with design. And for the first time ever, would you please give a loud round of applause for Richard Tyrer.
Oh, thank you. So hey guys, so as Jeremiah said, my name is Richard Tyrer. I'm the lead FPS systems designer at Cloud Imperium. And I basically deal with everything that is FPS or character gameplay and all of that kind of thing. So what we're going to talk about today. So first off, we're going to talk about the state of FPS weapons. So we've got a variety of unique and diverse weapons across the verse. But first off, the first kind of weapons that we added to the PU were kind of like the base weaponry in terms of your shotguns, your SMGs, the sniper rifles, basically what you'd expect from a modern day military shooter. Now, obviously because we're a sci-fi game, then we've also got the more exotic weaponry. So, in the last patch, we added the salvo, which is actually, it actually freezes the bullet in a firing mode and provides a fragmentation fire. Then you've got things like the Devastator, which is a charged mode, and then you have Custodian, which is more like a charged burst mode. So we've got kind of these exotic weapons and also these standard base weapons, and together they give us kind of a diverse range of weapons. But what we wanted to do when we come to the weapons is we wanted to make sure that each individual weapon has a reason for it to exist. The art, the audio, the animations, the gameplay, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet. They're all giving you that feel to say, okay, this is why it exists, this is why why you want to choose this weapon in the PU. So one of those things is what we've tried to do, and actually what we've been really pushing forward going forward is the manufacturer identity. So, you look at bearing. Bearing is kind of like what the military would use. That's all about efficiency, all about functionality. They're the ones that are going to actually do the job. Then you've got, say, Gemini. They're all about absolute high-velocity weaponry. They're about getting the bullet to the target as absolutely fast as possible. Then you've got, say, Klausenwerner, which is more specialist in laser technology. And then, say, Castac, which is all about charged weapons and multiple barrels. So they're all about alpha strike. They see a target, they absolutely unload everything they've got, and then they hope they've hit. And then you've got the Lightning Bolt company, which is a new company that we're going to be bringing in 3.8. Yes. In terms of Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Got carried away.
And they're going to be all about electron damage. So I'll touch on a bit of that in further, but you can see that that gives us kind of this unique identity. When you're selecting that weapon, that manufacturer, you know what you're going to get. And then in terms of the art, in terms of the gameplay, like I said, there's a reason for why that weapon exists. And then you've got attachments. Now, attachments kind of sit on top. They're the things that allow you to either further specialize or diversify. You want to put a 2 and 3 times hollow on a shotgun? Great. That means you've got a bit more range, a bit more accuracy. You want to put a red dot sight on a sniper rifle? Sure, you can do. You'll lose out in terms of the long range, but it allows you to use it more short range. And that attachments allow you to provide a bit more specialty that we've added the last couple of patches. And then when you take into account, say, a variety of damage types that we have in terms of the physical weaponry, in terms of ballistics, we've got energy, distortion, and chemical, and they're all kind of broken down again. So energy has the laser weaponry. So laser's really more a quick firing, but lower damaging than, say, to ballistics. Plasma's going to have damage over time effect and leave behind a damage so that it can be area of denial. Then you've got, say, electron damage, which is the Lightning Bolt company's specialist. That's going to provide electromagnetic damage and also stun damage, which will tie into the melee system that we're bringing live. And then you've got, say, tachyon, which is going to be obviously faster than light. And then you're looking at the more really specialists in terms of distortion, which is obviously really relevant, more relevant for ships, but we're actually, as you'll see throughout this talk, it will become more relevant for FPS as well. And then you've got the chemical, which will be adding the gamma as a future addition, but also that includes things like more environmental damage as well. So when you look at the weapons, and the reason why I wanted to give you an idea of the weapons is kind of where we're going with the armor. So in terms of the armor, we really have only got the light, medium, and heavy armor classes. They have what you'd expect from a light, medium, and heavy. The heavy's the really big, heavy guy. He's got the highest damage mitigation, but he's the slowest. And then you've got the light guy who's more agile, but can't take as much damage. So other than that, there's no real difference between the manufacturers. Really, when you look at heavy, once you've decided that, you're like, okay, which one looks the nicest? And really, we want to give you more choice. We want to we want to have that ability for you to go, actually, this armor has all these differences that I really like compared to this armor. So there's no real difference at the moment, but 3.7 was a step in the right direction. So first off, we added the personal commodity inventory. Now, it's a commodity, the fact that's kind of only really temporary. What we really want is a full item inventory, and that we'll be working on coming up. So that means that you'll be able to put in, ammo magazines, or grenades, or small weaponry, if you want to put a pistol in there, or a small SMG, and the size of your backpack in terms of the physicalized inventory, that will all be represented going forward. So that's something that is kind of the first toe in the water, shall we say, for personal commodity inventory. And then we also did a rebalancing on the stamina usage. So the stamina usage was too crushed. So that, again, there wasn't really a main difference in terms of the gameplay, in terms of the light, medium, and heavy. So, when you're looking at, say, a 50-second sprint in light, now it's only a 30-second sprint in heavy. And when you're playing, say, Theatres of War, or whether you're playing, you're running in combat, that's a big difference. 20 seconds might be the difference between you surviving and not surviving. But really, that's just the foundation. So, if you compare it to weapons, it's not really comparable. So, where do we want to go? So, I want you to go and look at an armor and look at it like you're buying a new ship. And we want armor to be almost like your own personal ship when you're walking around the verse. We want absolute meaningful differences between that light, medium, and heavy armor class. And so where does that start? First off, it starts off by giving it all power. So you can have different power ratings. Then we have different signatures in terms of EM, in terms of IR that tie into FPS stealth. Then you've got inventory. Now inventory is, like you said, it's, you've got a physicalized backpack, but it goes more than that. That backpack's going to be modular. You'll be able to attach different sizes of backpack, and they will only go onto different pieces of armor. So you'll have to make meaningful choices. And then you've got life support, which is, how much oxygen can I carry? What's the climate control in this system? What temperature can it survive? And temperature is something I'll be going on again further on. But again, then you look at, say, for example, the next layer is subcomponents. Now, as I took through the weapons, you look at attachments. It allows you to further specialize or further diversify. That's what subcomponents are going to be. If you want to, put heavy armor on, but you want to add more armor plating, or you want emission dampeners, or you want further utility and gadgets that we release in the future, that's where subcomponents come in. But really, that's just the armor classes themselves. That's the light, medium, and heavy armor classes. And that's kind of like just the base foundation, kind of how I was saying in the weapons, you've got your base classes. Now, where's the exotic gameplay? So that's when we're looking at, say, the classes and play styles. So we want to support the player careers. So in the PU, you want to be a miner, you want to be a bounty hunter, you want to be a fighter, you want to be an explorer. We want to support those on the ship side, but we also want to support them on the FPS side. We want you to choose equipment on the FPS that ties into what you're flying, that ties into the play style and how you want to play in the PU, because the PU's not an average game. It's a sandbox. It's Star Citizen. It's what you make it. So we want the equipment to tie into that. And so when you're looking at, say, player choice, what we did is we broke it down in between combat and utilitarian. And that's where we kind of broke down a matrix. So you can see this is kind of like all of the armors kind of in the PU at the moment are all like scattered around. But really what I wanted you to take from this screen is these 4 kind of pillars. We've got the combat fighter, the combat specialist, the utilitarian adventurer, and the utilitarian support. Now, when you look at those 4 pillars, you might be saying, well, what do they do? How do they tie in? So if you're looking at, say, combat fighters, that would have light, medium, and heavies in there. But that's the armor that you want if you're going into combat. That's the one that is the absolute specialist. That's what the military would use. It's got the most damage mitigation. It's got the most item ports for magazines. It's the most throwables, so the grenades. It's all about absolute combat powerhouse. And then you look at, say, the combat specialist. Well, that's when you're coming into where you want more niche, more special forces, more special ops. Now, they're still good at combat, but they're giving up some of their combat effectiveness to provide more utility. So if you want to be a bounty hunter and you want the absolute best-in-class radar for finding people to track down your target, to take them in, then maybe you'll pick the heavy combat specialist. And then you look on the other side of the road, you're looking at, say, the utilitarian. Now, utilitarian adventurer, that's kind of like best-in-class climate control. So if you're going into these harsh environments that's extreme cold, extreme heat, or you're going into these, really where it's got acid rain, that's when you want this pillar. And this pillar also includes where it's got like best-in-class inventory. So if you're going down mining and you want to say, I want to do one trip, I want to get everything while I'm there, you're still going to be combat worthy. You're still going to be able to compete in combat, but you're giving up some things to get other benefits. And then the utilitarian support that's more about consumables. So when we start doing healing gameplay, in terms of medic gameplay, healing your party, providing more support and giving you these unique roles when you're playing, and so that you can actually hone down in terms of what you want. And so when you actually add all that together, and then you're looking at, say, the damage types that we've already talked about in the weapons, well, everything we add to the game needs a counter, because otherwise, what's the point? So when you're looking at, say, the physical, energy, distortion, and chemical, there needs to be a counteract. So, we're going to need armor that has different resistances to provide different encounters. So if you want the combat armor, maybe that's best in class in terms of physical. But maybe in terms of the utilitarian adventurer, that's best in class in terms of energy damage or chemical, because you're going into these harsh environments. And so what we want to do is we want to have these meaningful choices where you're going to these, going to buy armor, and you're having the same decision making. Going, okay, should I get that one? Well, that gives me all this stuff, and okay, maybe I'll get that one. And then you go, okay, maybe I'm going to get both. But then in the world of physicalized inventory, you're like, well, I can't just get onto the planet and have 20 armors. You're going to have to make real decisions. And that's where it really ties into the gameplay. But before I go on too long, I'll pass over to my esteemed colleague, Jeremiah, and he will continue on some of the visuals.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So now that we heard that design, so what the character team has done was we've been in close contact with design, and we were like, okay, we have a butt ton of armor, right? We need to place them somewhere. And as you guys have seen in the Matrix, there was a lot on the combat side. So what we started doing was, if you look in the next slide, we took existing armors and we categorized them into archetypes, right? And so instead of having a light, medium, heavy just for combat, if you look to the very left, you can see that it's the heavy marine that we all have been running around in for a couple years now. But then what the concept team have done was, I think we showed this in a sneak peek before, we started designing armor that serve a specific purpose and visually communicate that gameplay. So no longer are we designing cool looking armor. Now we want to make armor that a stealth person would wear. Now we want to make concept armor that a bounty hunter with a specific class would wear. And so this is kind of the military stuff, and I know we've seen a lot of shooty stuff, but I want to move on to the next important thing, which excites me, is the utilitarian play style. So these are some new concepts that we haven't shown yet, so this is the first time you guys are seeing some of these. If you look to the very left, is something, it's a utilitarian support class. So as you can see in the back, it's got a little bit of backpacks, so we have more consumables, more utility slots. So these, you would expect to see these guys in battle, but then I would probably see them behind, supporting your teammates, right? So you'd have your assault guy running around, and this guy would be like, hey, you need some grenades, bro? Or like, you know, you need some magazines, bro? But like we wanted to diversify the play style, so no longer will you, in the future, be wearing, I want to wear the CDS armor because it looks cool. It'll be more of like, for this specific situation, I want to wear the best armor, right? So we want to move in the direction of gameplay and not just pretty stuff. But if we go to the next two images, which is something that excited me the most, is the utilitarian adventurer style, right? So we saw the Carrot commercial today, and what the concept team, the character team, what we really wanted to do was really sell that exploration, right? Like, what would you wear if you're going to a random system and you don't know what the hazards are? You do a reading, oh, it's really hot in there. You'd pick one of these bad boys up, right? You wouldn't wear a CDS heavy marine armor and be like, all right, we're going in, right? So you would wear a suit that's perfect for that certain type of environment. And so if you look in the middle, the concept for this was for a heavy exploration, kind of a cold weather, cold resistant type of suit. And if you look to the very right, we did a concept that was based off of that, but a little bit mixing onto the like metallic armor, so it's got a little bit more ballistic resistance. So even in the pillars that Rich was talking about, there will be some slight variants as well, so we can try to cater to multiple situations. But speaking of utilitarian adventurer, as we kind of teased in the very beginning, there is gameplay for climate control and temperature, and I'm going to toss this back to my esteemed colleague, Richard Tyrer.
So as Jeremiah touched on, you know, temperature is a thing, and really this is the beginning of the player status system. This is the beginning of survival in the PU, so that, you know, you're not just going to these planets and going, yeah, great, I'm just going to take everything and just going to put whatever armor on and do whatever I want. This is where you're going, okay, I'm going to a harsh climate, like I'm going on an Arctic expedition, and I'd have to actually choose the correct apparel. So before I get into temperature in detail, the first thing I want to introduce is basically which has been live for a long time, is the room system. Now, the room system is basically a way for us to basically mark up areas, and it's kind of like an environment container. It allows us to add what temperature it is. It allows us to add the humidity. It allows us to say, okay, is it breathable? And this kind of, what it does, it kind of contains the environment to say, what is the gameplay within this space from a actor status point or player status point of view? And so the thing that we take from it is what's called the apparent temperature. Now, the apparent temperature is, you might not have heard of that terminology, but you probably know what it is. If you've ever heard of them, you know, a weatherman or watched a weather channel where they go, okay, it's 10 degrees outside, but it feels like 5, that's basically apparent temperature. It's an amalgamation of atmospheric temperature, wind speed, and humidity. And in Star Citizen style, we take all of those in, and we feed it in to create what is the correct apparent temperature. So if it's really windy, and it's really cold, it's going to be really cold. And if it's really humid and really hot, it's going to be extremely hot. And so what we do is that we have this apparent temperature, and we basically take that out of the room system, and we go, okay, that's the value that we on the player side have to play with. And we go, okay, well, what do we do? Is that, well, first off, we say, what's the minimum and maximum threshold that somebody can survive in? And that's what we call, say, an operating window. So that operating window takes into account this range that says, OK, if you're within this range and that apparent temperature, then great. You don't have to do anything. You can survive indefinitely, and that's fine. But if you're not, then bad things will start to happen. But we didn't just want to go, OK, this is the operating temperature, bosh. We wanted to take into account, well, actually, the human body is all split up into lots of different scenarios. And so, the body has a higher surface area, and, it has a high density of blood vessels underneath the skin, and, the head's got a high density of that. So in terms of heat loss or heat gain, these different body types or should I say, these different areas on the body lose and gain heat at different rates. So if you've got something on your torso, that's going to give you a greater benefit than, say, for example, if you just put gloves on. And so that's when we've got some examples here. So if you've got, say, the guy on the left who's basically just, naked, his threshold is like, OK, if it's minimum 4 degrees, maximum 35 degrees, you know what? He'd be OK. But then you see the guy in the second right, he's put basically a jumper on, a coat. And that coat is basically giving him, it's pushing that threshold down. So that threshold now, as you can see, is -5 to 28. But because that's such a large surface area on the body, that's actually giving him a greater benefit than if he'd just put on shoes or a hat. And then you can see the guy in the middle, he's got full clothes on. So he's got shoes, he's got trousers, he's got a hat and gloves. And all of that is basically working towards saying, OK, this is the operating temperature. So when you actually go into these environments, and your HUD is going to say, OK, or when you're looking at the star map, say, OK, what is the temperature in these planets? Is it day? Is it night? Where am I going? You have to choose which kind of clothing that you want to go for. And when you look at armor, it's the same thing, because in the PU, you can put on a mixture of different armor types. So we can't just treat armor as a singular individual item. It has to be treated that you can mix and match. And then we look at the furthest on the right, which is basically a full armor. Now, a full sealed armor is basically a room in and of itself. So if you think of like your car and you're driving around and you've got the heater on, it's keeping you nice and warm. And if that was within the operating window of that apparent temperature that your car is, then great, it would be fine. But then if you broke down, then basically the apparent temperature of outside would start to equalize with the temperature on the inside, and you'd start to get cold. And over time, that temperature would be equalized. And that's basically how a sealed armor would work. So as I touched on, when we have armor in terms of that it's powered, essentially if you're outside of its operating window, well, from what it's been designed, what the manufacturer has chosen to design it for, then it will start to fail. And that's when that room system inside will start to equalize. And so when you have a sealed suit, it kind of gives you a buffer. And so when you look at what happens inside the operating window, well, kind of nothing happens because you're good. But what happens when it's outside the operating window? And how does it affect the gameplay, other than you being, having to be more prepared? Well, that's when we start to come in terms of the actor status or player status, in terms of actually the status effects that your characters are going to undergo. So if you start to get really, really cold, or you start to get really, really hot, then you're going to start to suffer hypothermia or hyperthermia. And with that will come negative effects. So you'll start to, in hypothermia, you'll start to get muffled audio. The screen will start to white out as you start to blur and become more sensitive to the light, as your basically body is starting to shut down. Frost will start to come onto the visor, so to say, OK, it's getting really cold inside now. You'll start to physically shiver. So when you're shooting, the bullet is coming from the barrel, it's going to affect your aim. Your heart rate's going to raise, so it's going to affect your stamina. And when you tie all this together, that's what creates an actual status on the player. And so really, hypothermia and hyperthermia are just the beginning in terms of the statuses. But there's so many more that we're going to be adding in terms of eating and drinking, whether you starve, whether you're starving, whether you're going to be dehydrated, whether you're going to become tired. And all of those things that are going to be coming are going to tie together to allow you to have meaningful reasons for why you choose your equipment. And talking about choosing equipment, then that's when we come into specialist cold and heat gear. And when you're looking at specialist cold gear, there's nothing better than the Caldera suit.
Big shout outs to Daniel Theophani for designing the suit we have, and Ben Gonsalves for wearing the suit. Thanks, Daniel. Poor Ben's been wearing the suit for, I don't know, 10 hours today. He was backstage for probably an hour waiting to come on, so thanks, Ben.
Shift? 10? Okay, all right. You guys have some time for pictures. All right, thank you, Ben. Thank you.
Thanks, Ben.
Let's give one more round of applause.
Woo! Thank you.
Thank you. So that was our Caldera suit, and this will be shown in the CitizenCon demo. And so I want to briefly go over kind of like what the process was, how we implemented the design that we spoke about earlier into the suit in particular. So no armor will go without going through concept. And that's where kind of, this is kind of like my expertise, I would say. So for the Caldera suit in general, the brief that we received was just to make sure that this suit was heroic in appearance and had to have non-combat focused armor. And also it had to look like it had enough insulation and something that can kind of take a punch, because we want it to look heroic, but mainly focusing on withstanding hazardous cold environments. Jesus, English, I can't speak today. And so that was the brief that we were given. So the concept, we had our concept artist, Michael Broussard. He did a bunch of sketches for us with multiple different color passes. And the cool thing about this suit compared to our previous armor sets, if you look very closely in the cosplay itself and also the image you can see on your screen, is we tried the diving bell helmet, the giant astronaut helmet that we have never seen in Star Citizen, right? Most of our helmets are really snug to the face, or we got a little bit of fishbowl, but we really wanted that giant diving bell going to like the most extreme hazardous environments type of suit. And so we also buffed up the silhouette, and because we wanted it to look very heroic. And then we got this from multiple iterations, and we found the colors and found the type of armor that we wanted, and we pushed it down, which caused actually a lot of challenges for...
Yeah, many challenges from start to finish.
Many challenges. I caused a lot of problems for the two next people below, which they will discuss. But then Cheyne Hessler was actually the senior character artist who built this model and is in the game. And so he'll briefly go over the mess that I have created.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeremiah.
Oh, you're welcome.
Hey everyone, I'm Cheyne Hessler, senior character artist at CIG. So today I'm going to be talking about character art and the process it kind of took to bring the Caldera suit to life, from concept all the way to a fleshed out character in game. Like Jeremiah was saying, when it comes to concept art, the goal is to kind of sell an idea for a suit to be approved and then moved on into character art. And you know, with character or concept art, what you really want is like to sell the idea. You want a big, heroic character to kind of give you a good feel for the suit, but also sell the idea of an aesthetic that feels good and looks badass. But with concept art, in order to make it look good, you have very heroic, stylized proportions. So that kind of includes something that might be scaled up, like 8 heads tall, and maybe for the Caldera suit, like 8 heads wide. So he's really big. If I went to Gaige with a character that I kind of created to try to match concept as realistic and close as possible, usually the goal of character art is to mimic and design a character to almost reflect concept art one-to-one. But when it comes to game art, we kind of have to follow these rules of design and function to make a more realistic and anatomical proportion of a character. So if I went to Gaige with a character that was 8 feet tall, super broad shoulders, Gaige would look at me and be like,
please no.
Looks great, but Cheyne, this guy is 8 feet tall, and the character in the game is more close to 6.
I said I was sorry, Cheyne.
Yeah, but those are some of the challenges, like with concept art and making characters, right? So when we receive concept, we want to understand the design and why it looks so cool and how we can carry and translate these ideas all the way to the game. So before starting and spending tons of time on trying to create characters for the game, I had to talk to Gaige, and Gaige and I had to have a more realistic approach on the concept because this guy has to be able to move around as if he was wearing any other suit in the game. Because we have one male base for our game, they all wear the same or different armor, but have to move away or move around in the same way that you would in a bathing suit to a full piece of armor like the Caldera suit.
Essentially translating the beautiful things that Jeremiah
Yeah.
draws up to work in the game.
So some of the things that help with that, because a lot of the times with concept art, you'll get really rough, quick sketches, almost to just get an idea across on how the reference or the concept art will look, and then translate that into 3D. Luckily, Michael Bassard rendered out this beautiful concept art for us to kind of give us details down to like the smallest bolt on the suit. So it was really nice to, as far as reference goes, if you're given a quick sketch, you kind of have to gather inspiration and references to kind of fill in the gaps of how suits kind of are built together, almost concepting later on in like the 3D character art phase to kind of almost design a little bit further past concept. So one of the things I like to do as far as building out these really complex suits is almost start from like a foundation or a base of art where you can kind of start from. Because as far as like rendered concepts go, it's always a bad idea, even in traditional drawing, to render right off the bat and try to get into details before you kind of get an understanding of how things are broken up. Proportion, form, shape language, these are all things that make more sense when you kind of start from the first read. So, you know, primary forms, secondary forms, and like most of all, like most important is like the silhouette or the read of a character. So some of the things that kind of help with that are kind of identifying shapes of the suit that kind of help identify the movement and mobility of the suit. Because after talking to tech art, we kind of get ideas of, okay, this guy's in the full suit of, you know, very hard surface design, but he has to be able to rotate his body, have a lot of movement around the shoulders and arms, twist, bend, all that great stuff that allows you to traverse and navigate through the world of Star Citizen. So breaking that up into smaller pieces always kind of helps the idea and kind of like the start of what we get into, which is the high poly phase. So what high poly is for 3D, and especially in character art for the Caldera suit, is digital sculpting, almost as if you would do it in clay. It's the same foundation, same techniques as you would with real clay, but this is like the digital form of that. And the best way to take something that's from concept art that's very stylized and, you know, heroic is to kind of bring it down to what we have in the game, which is our male base mesh. So taking that body, duplicating it, allows us to kind of extract the information, build something that's more realistic and proportional to something that's closer to like an in-game character. We still have to, like I was saying before, like carry the design of the concept through to something more realistic, but at the same time, bring as much out of the heroic nature of the concept and put it into the game. So this kind of helps us match where the joints are, like shoulder pads, elbows, wrists, get the anatomy of the suit down, but also fit it within the scale that can work in the game. And once we have something that's sculpted out, a little rough, this is definitely not a phase where we're trying to get to an endpoint that allows us to translate something into 3D or a very low poly form of 3D, just to get a good idea of base form and breakup. But from that, we kind of rebuild this stage. Usually after high poly, we try to retopologize it to kind of give it a more machine-built look. Because with hard surface, sci-fi always looks great because everything is clean, forms flow with each other, they're lined up, they look machine-made. So with rebuilding the high poly, we want to retopologize that, which is a form of 3D modeling. So essentially, the foundation of modeling is polygonal modeling. And when we have the high poly mesh, the best way to clean that up and refine it into something that's more hard surface and sci-fi is to retopologize it. So once we have our high poly base, it's everything that's going to drive the detail into the game. But one of the best ways to translate that, like I was saying previously, is retopology. So we go through a process of decimation. And what decimation is it takes the surface detail of a mesh, and as the surface flattens out, the detail is kind of removed. So we have, assets that are millions of polygons. An asset like this or a little piece can go from 1 million polygons up to 5 million. Something that's a little bigger, like a torso, can go from 5 million to 12 million. So in order to actually go from a robust program like ZBrush, which we're digitally sculpting, We have to decimate it, get down to something more reasonable, like in the thousands, 7, 15K, and retopologize it in Maya. And the tool we do that, or use that in Maya with, is Quadra. So what Quadra allows us to do is place points on the surface using the decimated mesh, rebuild it to something that's more optimized and game-friendly. Yeah, and so like I was saying before, with the high poly, things have to be clean. They have to almost appeal to be, hand or machine made. So, retopologizing is usually a very, labor-intensive task. Rebuilding something from scratch is like very time-consuming, but the alternative is to kind of go back to our high poly stage, which is made up of subdivision levels. At the lowest subdivision level, we kind of have our base, which would kind of translate into something more low poly, something that would almost go into the game. And with subdividing that, we can take it up to something from 13,000 polygons to something that's more around 12 million to get the detail. But to save the time on the game asset, what we can do with the high poly is drop it down to the lowest form, which is sub D1. So instead of starting from scratch, we can kind of start from a point where it's almost 70 to 80% done, and kind of save time, and then also speed up the process for something that's production friendly. So once the low poly is done, it has great form. It matches like the concept as close as possible. At this stage, we kind of want to flatten everything out. It's almost similar to taxidermy. You have a mesh, but you want to be able to cut it up, lay it out flat, and project textures. And what texture maps allow us to do is assign, wear, dirt, ambient occlusion. Can I get water? Yeah, thank you. And normal maps. So what normal maps do is it takes the surface and how the light hits it and kind of breaks up the form, but it also allows like the definition of the high poly to really show through. With the blend maps, it carries through the color, which is the materials of each asset. It's almost like an ID map. So you have red, green, and blue. Each color is going to assign a new material on it to kind of break up the form and anatomy of the material breakup. So what does that look like in the game? So we started with the base mesh, which is our low poly. And as you can see, the normal map will kind of drive the form of the asset. On top of that, you have the ambient occlusion, which kind of creates a self-shadowing of the effect. The blend map will add actually materials on it, and the decals past that will kind of show the different details of that effect. And in the game, this is what you kind of see at the end of it, with all of the components kind of put together. And so that's kind of the idea of how you create an asset in the game. And I'll pass it over to Gaige to bring the character to life.
Thank you, Shane. So first, too, I want to thank the team back home, especially Chris Van Compernol, who set up the asset on the tech art side. They did some amazing work here, and they were the ones who actually handled most of the problem solving that worked with Shane and Jeremiah. So great job on them. So one of the, oh yeah, definitely applause for the team. So one of the key elements of that armor is the massive diving bell helmet. And this actually gave us some great opportunities to implement some new tech and features that we wanted to bring to the community for a long time. And let's take a look at those. Now, an easy feature that can be good and bad is decoupling the helmet. Now, there's a couple ways we can do this. The first is rather simple. Now, normally the head, or the helmet, sorry, is always locked to the head. Now, like Jeremiah pointed out earlier, they're super snug, they're pretty tight, and they kind of always follow you around. You don't really get to see much of them. But we want to decouple that and give you that more diving bell experience, which we got to do with this new armor. So what we do is we spread the influence across multiple joints. Normally, it's always on the head joint. This time, we were able to spread it across the spine, the neck. As you can see here, you can see the influence values actually. 60% to the head, which kind of allows you to sort of look around inside this helmet that you're wearing. And it gives a pretty interesting first-person experience. And it also allows for some extra animation touches, too. We get some helmet wobble, just some extra realistic feel. But this also brings problems. So let's check out a video of kind of what this looks like. Now, you can look around the helmet, but this is a little bit too much, because it's animating right now as if there were no limitations at all. So you're kind of moving as if you have no helmet on, like you had a naked head or a tight helmet. Now, we got to fix that. And how do we do this? We do it with view limitations and aim limitations. Now, view limitations are the isolated movement of your head while you're aiming in a certain direction. This is what we call free look mode, and allows you to move without changing your aim. Now, let's say you're kind of pointing your gun down your sight. You want to look to the left, look to the right. You don't want to move away from your target. That's free look. And we use view limitations to sort of limit that slightly to prevent you from turning around too much in this helmet, because you are slightly restricted, and we don't want to break the immersion there of being in this helmet. The second is aim limitations. Now, these are the actual, literally, the aim directions you're moving in. And we limit this, which gives the effect that you see in this video, and it prevents you from clipping fully through your torso. And this is kind of the effect of having incredibly bulky armors. So while you do get all these advantages, there are slight mobility restrictions to sort of balance this out, so you're not too overpowered. It's not terrible, and it kind of gives you a realistic feel, so it's actually somewhat of a benefit. It's kind of nice. Now, the next thing I want to talk to you about is a feature that we've actually been wanting to bring to you guys for a really long time. We teased it years back with the legendary helmet flip, but that was originally only for S42, and then we wanted to create parity with the two systems in the PU by just giving you a seamless experience. It is the helmet equip and unequip. But this brings problems that we are going to solve in a bit. But first, I want to show you actually situations that you run into in other games, modeled by the beautiful Jeremiah here. Let's take a look. Now, typically in the engine, when you equip an item, it will pop onto you. The graphics are incredible here.
That's amazing.
Yeah, really good stuff. Really great job, Jeremiah.
That's what we want. That's what we want.
We want to give you guys
That's Star
a
Citizen
very good
right there.
experience. So yeah, typically these things just pop onto the player, and normally this is fine. The gameplay aspect is totally fine here, but we want to give you, something better in the best damn space sim ever. It's got to feel like it's your helmet, right? So let's take a look at how we do this.
Oh, thank God that's over.
We can leave it looping for a while. We can go back.
No, please go for it.
Okay, so let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. So on this one, let's just start from the beginning real quick. Now, like I said, showing off the visor effects here. It was great work by the VFX team. It's kind of nice to get that in. But let's go ahead and get some cover so we can dry off and check out these helmets. Now, right now, I'm wearing the light undersuit. And you can see some other helmets. We have a variety in the universe. So let's go ahead and pop off this guy. Take a look. And this is just the Odyssey helmet, classic. And these are some of the new options available to you once you unequip your helmets. Now we want the helmet to be a more personal experience. You want to be able to feel it, you want to be able to place it, you want to be able to throw it around, and that's exactly what I'm about to do, because I want a new helmet. Boom, get that out of here. Now, the Caldera helmet in front of me, I actually cannot equip this because I don't have the bespoke armor that's required to maintain it. So let's go ahead and take an inspect look real quick. He's okay, folks. So because I can't wear that one, let's take a look at a classic over here. This one's more my style. I want to try out the S42 helmet. Kind of reminds me of old man, I like to role play a little bit. So let's go ahead and put this on, take another look at it. Now, the artist, especially Cheyne, puts a lot of work into these helmets, so you want to be able to inspect them. You want to be able to look around inside them, kind of see the detail we put in there for you. It's a completely immersive first and third experience. So, even though you see it on the outside, you can see it on the inside. It's great stuff. I'm going to take this little guy with me. Got to have a buddy.
That turtle, I swear.
And now let's take a look. So what just happened was I unequipped a helmet from my loadout, physicalized it into the verse, tossed it aside with persistence, and then equipped another helmet that had persistence onto my character's loadout, and this is now my helmet. There's a variety of things you can do. Good stuff. So let's see how we did this. Now, the system that you're kind of seeing is something we call a state machine, or helmet states. Now, what exactly is a state? A state could be seen as a list of gameplay options available to you within a certain context. Now, when you play the game, you're actually constantly flowing through states, whether you realize it or not. Like, for example, I am right now in a sitting state. The options available to me are maybe point at things, I can nod aggressively at my coworkers, and click this button right here. But if I stand up, I have a few more states available to me. And that's basically what the helmet is going through in this state machine. And in the example here, you can kind of see the mesh format changes that are happening during these state transitions. On the left, we have the skin mesh. This is the deformable mesh that the tech artist set up. It'll move with animation, it'll move with your character, and this is kind of the main state that you'll almost always see your helmet in. It gives you your UI, everything's equipped here. And then on the right, we have the CGF static mesh. This is a cheaper mesh for the game, and this is what you'll see physicalized in the world. It comes with a proxy, you can throw it around, you could shoot it, you can do whatever you want to it, and these are kind of like the two opposite states you'll most often see the helmet in. Or sorry, meshes that you'll see for the helmet. And actually, what you can see here is that during the removal, there is a seamless transition happening between these two meshes to give you kind of that seamless effect. Now let's take a closer look. Yeah, going through helmet equips, re-equips. So state machine flow. There's a lot of states. Right here you can see kind of the two opposite states, the settled and the equipped state, and then each, before they can go to another state, have a list of transitions that will bring them to the next state. And with these transitions, we've animated them essentially. That gives you kind of this first-person, unified first and third feel that we've added to the verse. And now even more states. So the helmet has all of these available to it: carried, inspecting, settled, drops. And what's interesting about the dropped and settled, while they seem very similar and using the same geometry, the dropped is the settled version, except actively simulating in the world. So let's say you throw something to the ground, it is in the dropped state because it is actively kind of tumbling, trying to find its place to rest. And then once it's found its resting state, it will then go into the settled state. And it gives you even further options that will accompany the animations for like kind of this seamless pickup animation. And as you can see in the list too, once it's dropped, if it actually falls in space, it may eternally be in the drop state because it's just kind of floating around, you know? And you may see this thing just tumbling around. You can hit it with your ship. You can do all kinds of things. It's very fun. Now, with these states, the visual aspect of them are, you could consider them subgeometries. The default geometry you see here is the settled state. This is the geometry you see in the world. It is the helmet that kind of represents just this resting helmet in the world, yeah. But let's say you want to pick up that helmet. You want it to be your helmet. Or let's say old man wants to pick up this helmet. Or you're playing a female, you're playing a male, whatever you're playing, it's all one unified item, and you want to pick up this helmet. As soon as you pick it up, it goes and gets a tag that is called the held entity, and it then enters one of these subgeometry paths that becomes your helmet. Now, so for as long as you're holding it, it will be your geometry. You can hold it, toss it, put it on, and it's all the same shape. So it'll give you that kind of like seamless experience, which is really nice. And we worked really hard to kind of work all this out to give you this really smooth system. Let's go a little bit deeper into this. Now, the male geometry is going to be the skin mesh, or sorry, the head geometry is going to be the skin mesh, and then once you take it off, put it into your carried state, interacting state, it'll become the held entity, and then there's a further subgeometry that could be considered the display geometry. Now, let's say you want to put it on a rack or a display shelf. It may have a custom version, and of course you want it to be your version or the version of that type of character you're playing as, and it will then go to that geometry. And now looking ahead, what do we kind of want to add to this? Let's go ahead and play that. So for the system, we want to improve the hand placements. We want to improve the UI boot ups. We want smoother interactions and animations. And actually, a lot of this is already underway and in our current builds. We just didn't get it in time for this presentation, but these are all well coming along, and we're really excited to show it to you. And then we also want first-person improvements. like our designer Rich here. He'll be improving the first-person experience, the aim limitations. These are all work-in-progress things that will keep improving based on user feedback, internal feedback, CR feedback, all kinds of things. And then back to my esteemed colleague, Jeremiah.
Also, that is it for the character archetype panel. Thank you so much for coming. Before we officially end the panel, we actually like to give a special thanks to the team, not just in Los Angeles, but also in the UK and also Germany. We have a list of teams. It's not just the 3-4 people here, but it's an entire team, and it's kind of a joint effort. And so we've listed those names, so if you can have a round of applause for all these names listed over here who can make this possible for us.
Yeah. Whoa.